Good morning and welcome to 23 Degrees Sideways. I'd like to talk about this infrastructure bill and tax plan just a little bit. There's a couple things I want to point out. It's very telling when you have specific kinds of selling points and what the nature of those selling points are. For example, the biggest deal is, we rank 13th in infrastructure. It's a bullshit argument, okay? It's a bullshit statement. You know, how much area do we have? What is our transportation distance? What are we talking about with infrastructure? You know, American internet pretty much sucks. We're pretty bad at that. There's a couple of reasons. The reasons all have to do with government intervention, which protects low-functioning corporate interests, and that's the absolute basic of it. Okay, a lot of what we have that is problematic is state capitalism. Okay, let me explain this to you. State capitalism is not free market economics. It's not free market capitalism. It's not, I want to say it's not really capitalism, but that's really difficult to say because capitalism has become a political philosophy instead of just an economic method, and that's really messed up. Okay, your political and moral philosophy should not be capitalism. It's an economic method. It's not a universal yet economic method, and there are places where it's not such a good idea. For example, healthcare. You know, and I'm gonna get hammered on this one if more than 5 people ever watch this video, you know, for saying that capitalism doesn't really have a good place in healthcare. There's reasons I say that, which are for another video. But what we have with, for example, internet infrastructure is not free market capitalism. It's state capitalism. And that's a very different animal. That is where the corporations are protected by work hand in hand with government for their own purposes. And the purposes are not to provide the best service at the cheapest price, because that's not what's going on. So I find it interesting that even though the selling point for the infrastructure plan, for the tax plan is, we suck. That's not a good selling point, okay? That's really not. Moving forward, the other primary selling point that I notice people talk about a lot is, we're going to raise the corporate tax rate. We're going to make those rich people pay. No, you're not. You're really not. I already know how this is going to work. State capitalism happens to be a really big deal with fascist type government operations, and that's what we're dealing with right now. So that whole raise the corporate tax rate thing is only going to hurt smaller corporations. The reality is it's going to hurt smaller corporations. The larger corporations with the most government influence are going to go back to full globalism with most of their operations outside of the U.S. in various tax havens, and it's going to suck. And they're going to influence the government as much or more than they do now, while not having any vested interest in the success of the nation because they're not in the nation. That's a very odd one to try to think through, but there it is, okay? The selling point of to the public, what you're selling to the public is, we're going to hurt people. We're going to make them pay. That's not positive. That's not how you sell a infrastructure building, positive expansion bill, okay? It's not the message. It's not the message that's being presented, and that's not the message of the infrastructure idea. The idea is negative, okay? The idea is negative pretty much all around. And they don't want to do anything for globalized improvements. And I mean that in the global, everybody, universal improvements. For Americans, they want to target special populations. They want to make sure that there's no benefit to the privileged, right? Except that everything's, except for the elites, because the elites are going to get everything no matter what. It's just, it's so freaking annoying. I'm supposed to be a little bit short on the video on this one and just point out that, you know, the entire Democratic theme here is negative, 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 negative. You know, it's in the libertarian circles right now as a bit of humor. How do you piss off a Republican? Tell them they're Clinton era Democrats. There's some amount of truth to that. Okay, when Trump, the previous president, did his big economic stimulus package, did his big economic thing, his tax plan, the tax breaks, the business environment, all that stuff was stuff that Democrats in the mid-90s pushed for, would have loved. It was literally a Clinton tax bill with Trump's name on it, and the Democrats hated it so much. And you try to point that out to them, and they would deny it. They would deny it horribly. There was no... I showed people numbers. This is how much of a difference it made for the middle class, and they would deny it. They would say, well, maybe that's one or two examples, but that's not everybody. And I'm like, nope, 80%, that's everybody. No. The negativity is built into how you operate as a Democrat, how you sell stuff. You know, one of my libertarian friends talks about how it's not that she doesn't hate Republicans as much as Democrats. She hates them both equally. It's just that there's so much more to hate with Democrats. And I responded with a comment that, you know, the thing is, I can usually talk a Republican around to saying something like, okay, fine, do what you want. As long as you're really not hurting anybody and I don't have to look at it, just go away and do what you want. There's a freedom in that. I can't get that from a Democrat. I can't get a Democrat to accept that, okay? There must be bans and mandates. Bans and mandates. So, it's kind of the same thing economically, you know. And I'm not an ANCAP. I'm not a hard libertarian. I'm fine with the fact that we're going to have government programs and managing them. I'm also an imperialist, and you need to have an expansionist society to have maximum liberty or to have developing liberty. A contracting society is always going to contract liberties first. Just the way it is. Back to the infrastructure plan and the tax bill. Selling it with negatives is a really specific sign of what's going on. Don't expect good things out of this, okay? Don't expect to get anywhere with it. You know, I hate to say we're in a place where it's like, get what you can and run, but if there's any programs, any benefits, anything you can do to get some of that money back from the government, take it and run. There's no... It's hard to say there's no positive building opportunities here, but there really isn't. You know, not the way the Democrats are structuring their selling points, structuring what they want to do. What they want to do is hurt people. It's every time they come up with a plan or something, they sell it with who they're gonna punish. They sell it with who they're going to punish or fuck over. That's a message. That's a message they're sending you. Pay attention to the message. Stay sideways.